Welcome to the Performance Enhancing Podcast. It's like steroids for your brain. A podcast for people looking to live life at their peak potential. Chock full of real-world tools and knowledge that you can apply in your life today. By providing you with a lens into the lives, beliefs, practices, and actions of those who are already living extraordinary lives, the Performance Enhancing Podcast will help you shift your mindset or create that change in your daily rituals and habits so you can explode with success in the areas of life that are most important to you. So get ready for another dose of Performance Enhancing Podcast with SatoriPrime. Here's your host, Ilan Ferdman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Pep Talk, Performance Enhancing Podcast with your host, Ilan Ferdman. About to delve into part 2 of my interview here with Dan, who's a homeschool dad. I mean, very revolutionary concepts for me. Amazing to hear someone doing it by themselves, basically. A lot of the rebuttals and things that people argue about homeschooling, I really grill them on here. So things like how to train kids to deal with failure. That's a big conversation we have. And then the biggest rebuttal that every parent knows, even without me saying it, you're going to be like, well, what about the socialization aspect? So some pretty incredible facts around socialization. One of the things that he brought up, which I'd never heard of before, was how schools and life in general is really using age segregation. So very interesting concept there. Creating kids that love to read, how he goes about that and how he's had success doing that, and then what kind of exercises he uses to train the different aspects of his children's brains. All in all, I have to say, just an absolutely incredible conversation, incredibly growing and just changing the way that I perceive this whole world. So I hope it's as impactful for you. And if you have young kids and you'd like to connect with Dan, all the information will obviously be below this video. So make sure you either come check below the video and or go to our SatoriPrime.com/podcasts page, find this episode and look for the resource guide. Hope you guys have an amazing day. Enjoy. One of the things that you mentioned before was failure, which is a conversation that I'm big on, especially in training entrepreneurs and things like that. And it's something that I feel like as a society, we need to kind of rebrand that word in its entirety. With your children, when they're going through this process of accelerated learning, they're obviously failing thousands, tens of thousands of times. What's their relationship like to failure, one? And two, how have you kind of nurtured that to give them a different context of it as they're going through this process?
Okay, I would say that, have you heard the expression teacup kids?
Mm-mm.
So teacup kids are kids who go to college and they got A's their whole life and all of a sudden they get a C and they're so fragile they shatter.
Yeah.
And there's a lot written on this online about teacup kids today and how they're in school and the mother's contacting the professor to ask to bump the grade up. And, and their mother comes in every week to do the laundry. I don't want to raise teacup kids. One of the best, let me just give you an example. One of the best tools for teaching kids how to accept failure is get them to play chess in chess tournaments. Because chess is a hard game. I mean, golf is a hard game. You know, you whiff, you hit the ball in the trees. It's embarrassing. It's tough for kids and adults and anyone who plays. Chess is the same way. Chess, you can have some spectacular failures. You can be winning a game and really confident, and you can blow the game in an instant because of an oversight. I made a decision when my son was about 6 to start doing chess. And what I found was not only that chess is an amazing game in so many respects, one thing it does teach the kids is how to accept failure. And yeah, the first time my kid goes to a tournament, yeah, they lose, they cry. You can always tell who the kids are that are new at chess because they cry. But at least the parents took them to the tournament. I have parents that have emails in my inbox I could pull up where I'm trying to get a parent to get their kid in a chess tournament, and maybe dad says they're not ready for it, they're going to lose, and they're going to lose all confidence. And it's unbelievable how many parents out there are afraid their kid is going to have some negative feedback. They're afraid if they make their kid sit down and do a workbook, the kid's going to cry.
Yeah.
Good. Get that kid out of their comfort zone.
Good.
Tears are not, they're not blood. And my kids, if anything, my son is overconfident. And I have to continually beat him back because he's, my wife's, he's not to be too stereotypical, but my wife is 100% Italian, and my son is not detail oriented, and he's like, so, who cares if I lose? Who cares if and I say, no, I care. You better care, and I almost have to drill it in him. He's the opposite of me. I thought a chess game was war. I thought a soccer game was war. I still do, but he has, there's some drawbacks to that, of course. But he has a little bit too much overconfidence. And it's a good thing I have him in chess and I have him playing against adults, and we travel to tournaments just to keep him, humble a little bit.
And how has he dealt with losing? Because obviously he's...
Much better. All the kids get better at it. They have to just get used to... All the kids can handle losing a chess game. It's a game, for crying out loud. But they just have to lose a bunch of games to get it out of their system. And I don't know if you know anything about chess, but when you play in a chess tournament, they play something called touch move, where if you touch a piece with your fingers, you have to move it. And so one of the problems with kids is they move too fast, they grab their queen, and now they don't want to move their queen because they see they could get checkmated or something, and because they touch that piece, they have to move it. And so basically it's a complete blunder. They basically lose the game over very silly, immature mistakes. And all kids, my kids have lost tons of games, especially my son, at a young age from being immature. But the more games they play, the more tournaments I take them to, the more often it's their opponent who is inexperienced and who's making the silly mistake and coughing up games that they should have won rightfully. So has your
son read The Art of Learning?
I have read it.
Has he read it?
He hasn't read it yet, but I have everybody watch that movie, Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Yeah.
And in fact, yesterday we were in Washington Square talking to the chess hustlers there. We know a few of them. There is a video of my son playing and beating one of them on YouTube that has, 170,000 views. He played one of the chess hustlers. But I read Josh Waken's dad's book. Everyone's seen the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. I read the book because I want to know what role the parent played in raising Josh to be chess prodigy. And basically he says that he did about 10 to 15 hours of chess per week back in the day. And if you remember the movie, he was playing against, which to me, I was excited to see that because I said, we could do 10 to 15 hours of chess a week. And that's all it takes. That's all it took back in the 80s. Now it takes more than that because actually, this is a little sidebar, half of the top chess players or youth chess players in America don't go to school at all. They are homeschooled.
Makes sense. They have time.
One thing Josh Waken's dad said, because he was playing, his rival from the movie was this kid, I think his name might have been Jeffrey something, I'm not quite sure. But that kid didn't go to school. He was homeschooled back in the 80s. And there was a little bit of a crazy situation going on there. But what Josh Waken's dad said was that's an unfair advantage, having a kid not go to school. And I said, yes, it is. It most certainly is an unfair advantage. Or you could say it's an undue burden placed on children to have them go to school.
Interesting. So now I want to ask the question that pretty much I think is your probably number one rebuttal to all of this. And I'm sure you can say it before I even say it. But the whole socialization factor where everyone's like, well, I don't want my kids to grow up and be weird or not able to handle social situations or not be with friends. There's this whole aspect of school that does that, which is, I think, a really wrong stigma, but it's definitely the conversation I hear most. So what would you say to that, and how are you kind of handling that with your kids?
Okay, so socialization is actually not a negative of homeschooling. It's a major positive. And there are people that homeschool their kids strictly for socialization reasons. A little bit about the word socialization. You will never hear the word socialization used except in two contexts. One, homeschooling rebuttals, and two, prison. We want to socialize criminals before they release them from prison and all this. So those are occasionally you'll hear someone say, we put our kid in daycare for socialization reasons.
Yeah.
But usually it's just used in those two contexts. Socialization in the real world is completely voluntary. Nobody has to hang out with anybody else. You actually have to show some initiative. You have to offer something up for a friendship to actually begin and endure. That is real world socialization. School socialization is not, and I'll get into weird and all that other stuff too. School socialization is not organic, which is a very trendy word these days. It's not real socialization. It's what I call forced association. Those kids in school are not really friends. My kid has all these friends in school. They're not friends. They are, if I can be a little bit, well, I'll just say they're what I call co-inmates. They are people that have to be in a certain place at a certain time, and they kind of make the best of it. They're co-inmates. They're not really friends.
Like a family during Thanksgiving.
You don't have to go to Thanksgiving. I got ways how you can opt out. But so there are really no friendships in school, and there's so many other negative things that happen in school. One, because kids are forced to be around other kids, they actually don't value human interaction. Two, kids who don't see kids every second of the day, they value, interaction with other kids. And I see this all the time. I'll take my kid to Boy Scouts, and he runs up to everybody, hey, how you doing, guys? Because my son is an incredibly social, incredibly happy kid. And they're all just like, Well, and I don't blame them. They see kids all day. It's not a big deal for them to see another kid, even if it is my son. And, they don't have any freedom. They're not happy kids. Once the kids start to get to 5th and 6th and 7th grade, we start talking about, that's how kids are. It's teenage rebellion and all this stuff. No, that's what you're seeing is you're seeing the fruit of, years, 10 plus years, of not having any free time, not having any free time to be themselves, not having any say in how they spend their days, not having any time for something that's very important for kids, hobbies and passions.
Yeah.
These kids are overscheduled. They're told to go here, do this, be with this person to an extent that's never actually happened in human history before. So of course they're not happy. Now I don't know how kids can be socialized and unhappy. But let's talk about weird for a second, because my wife even said that to me. I could see that we could never send my kids to school, or at least my son John, who was at the forefront at the time. And I could already see that there was no way he was going to go to school. My wife wasn't quite there yet. When I was 100%, he's not going to school, she was still 20%. And I had to drag her along. And she had to, be overwhelmed by the evidence. But one of the things she said to me was, I don't want my kids growing up to be too weird, too different. Now, I still tease her about that now, because our goal now is we want our kids to be so weird.
As weird as possible.
as weird as Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and all the other, ultra unique, successful people. There's a great internet picture out there. It says, weird is the side effect of awesome.
I love that.
I mean, to somebody who says, I don't want my kid to be weird, I mean, what do you want your kid to have? To be a total conformist, to have no original ideas, to be, a walking stereotype? And this is what school produces. It produces a bunch of people who have, like we talked about, they have received opinion. They have very, very small worlds. I live in New York City, and we're actually in the house my wife grew up in. And, there's 10, 20 million people. I don't know how many million people are in the metropolitan area. But she did not have a single friend outside of her town. Our backyard here is a whole other town. She didn't have one friend from that other town over there. And I'm not picking on her. This is how we all were. We were siloed into our own towns. And not only that, we were siloed into our own age groups. When I was in 5th grade, the 6th graders wouldn't talk to us, and I wouldn't talk to the 4th graders.
Yep.
And that's how school is still. It's called age segregation. And it exists in school, only in school, really. In the real world, you never talk into a group and say, all right, this is only for people born in 1994.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist in the real world. And when we age segregate kids, there's a lot of things they miss out on. They miss out on interacting with younger kids. They miss out on interacting with adults and their grandparents. And age segregation is rampant, not just in school, but it started in school, but it's filtered out through the rest of society. And this is an experiment. This is a human experiment that, I don't want to be the first of anything. It's been around for thousands of years. I don't want to be, the part of, to give you another example, this is the first generation of kids who are being raised where outside, trees and grass is not their primary area of
Playground.
primary sphere of recreation.
Yeah.
Kids are outside, they're wandering, they're climbing trees, they're learning about the limits of their body. All these things. There's a great book called Last Child in the Woods, Curing Our Children of Nature Deficit Disorder, out there, that goes way in depth on this topic. But I don't want to be on the side of any of these things. Children were raised by adults since the beginning of time. Now children are being raised by other children. They're being raised by certified experts. They're being raised in mass, which is very inefficient. And they're being raised by the culture, which is nothing I want my kids to be raised by. The culture is a cesspool out there.
Yeah.
And there's a great author, Neil Postman, who he's an NYU professor. He's written tons of books. One of which is must read for anybody. It's called Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Amusing
ourselves to death. And he thought when cable TV came in 1983 that it was the end of intellectualism in America. And that was in 1983. He thought it was over. What would he say if he saw, the zombification of iPhones today? But anyway, he said that education, the purpose of education is to be countercultural. In other words, if society was liberal, education should be conservative. And I use these in the generic sense. And the other way too, if society is conservative, education should be liberal.
Interesting.
And it should be a countercultural instrument to put everything in historical context. But now there's no lines between the culture and education. They're pushing Minecraft in the classroom, iPads in the classroom. There really are no lines. So if you want your kid to have a different perspective, the ultimate way to do that is to pull them out of the system completely. But it's also to turn off the television. It's also to control all the inputs in their life. I mean, if you want to control the output of your children, you have to have some say in the inputs. And if you start picking the inputs, if you start saying, you know what, my child's a blank slate, I want to sculpt the ideal education, it's not going to be what everybody does. It's going to be far different. It's going to have different subjects. It's going to have different intensity, and it's going to be customized to that child.
Yeah.
It's going to be customized, taking into consideration their strengths, their weaknesses, and the family's, ultimate long-term values as well.
So I guess the question that a lot of other people might have is, this all sounds great, but both parents work. How would we ever go about doing this?
Well, there are tons of families who both parents work and they pull their kids out of school. There are tons of single parents who homeschool their kids. Again, we're getting into like limiting beliefs again.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone's kids are the most important thing to them, if their education is the most important thing, then they will figure it out. They will become very resourceful, very fast. But I work. I've heard it a million times. I've worked since day one. We have the internet now. People can do so many things online that weren't possible years ago. The economy's got, especially where we live in New York, there's so much space for entrepreneurial thinking. I think I mentioned this in an article the other day. I actually wrote an article directed at homeschool parents who don't work. Because there are some homeschooling parents who are like, you know what, I homeschool my kids. I don't need to do any side work. And I try to give them a little bit of nudge and say, you know what, you should probably work too. Because if you have extra money, you can get those kids those piano lessons that might seem too expensive. You can travel to London and give your kids that experience, and so on and so forth. So, but I work is just another limiting belief. The reason that's hard is because when we have kids, we have no idea what we're doing. We ourselves, I didn't notice a baby stroller until I had a kid. So I went through my whole 20s. I never even, then once you have a kid, you notice every single one of them.
And you're like, wow, that's a really cool stroller. And then you think to yourself, oh my God, I can't believe I just had that thought.
So the age segregation has separated us from basically, young children. And so we weren't prepared for marriage. And even when we get married, we aren't prepared mentally for kids. So maybe we have 2 BMWs. Maybe we have a huge mortgage. Maybe we have a lifestyle that doesn't have room for one parent to, if not both, to take a step back, in terms of time work. I'm not saying in terms of giving up income, because sometimes the best thing you can do is quit your job that, takes up a lot of time and find out more ways to get leverage into making money. But the root of the problem is that we have kids and we have no idea what's going to happen. We just kind of, we're in the fog of new parenthood. We're just trying to make it through the day. We're just trying to adjust to a new sleep schedule, which has completely interrupted our self-orbiting existence, which has been, 30 years in the making. And so by the time that kid is 3 and 4, we're just making it through the day. We're not thinking down the road. We're just trying to put out fires. And one of those put the kids in front of the TV, put them in daycare. And next thing you know, the kid's 11, 12 years old, and maybe we're not happy with what happened. It all comes back to a lack of foresight. And I didn't have any foresight when I had my kids. I didn't know what was going to happen. There were a couple things that jolted me. I consider myself to be very fortunate that I stumbled upon this.
Yeah.
In my stumbling upon my good fortune, hopefully can be a bounty for other people. I have people I work with whose kids are 1 year old and they want to know what they can do. They're already thinking long term. But I work, what can you cut out on the expense side? How can you change your job? What can you do in terms of baby steps to accelerate your kids? Because there's a lot between dropping my kids off at daycare, letting them watch TV all day, and full-fledged homeschooling with 6 private tutors and all sorts of crazy intense curricula. Just turning the TV off is a big deal. And one of the things I try to do is just get people to make that baby step. All right, how about you just do 3 days a week where there's no TV at all? Tell me if you see a change in your kids. Then it's 5 days a week. Then you take the Band-Aid off all at one step. Then your kids are reading books. Then you see your kid, he's crushing kindergarten. Maybe you hire somebody like me or someone else, or you recruit grandma or an older sibling to sit down and work with that kid one-on-one. There are plenty of people who homeschool their kids but don't do any of it themselves. They just hire private tutors. And depending on where you live, it can be very, very cheap. In New York, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
But in other parts of the country, you can get a full-fledged, super confident, super competent private tutor for almost nothing.
Wow.
And even if I said to you, you're going to have to give up some money. I'm just going to be devil's advocate on my own argument. Say you did have to give up some money to loss of income to homeschool your kids. I would tell you should do it because, when's the best time to plant a tree? It's 10 years ago. Everybody knows this adage. And the second best time to plant a tree is today.
Yep.
I try to convince parents to invest in their kids now. Now, you have 3 kids, so you're looking at over $1 million in college. You're already on the hook for that. On your plan, you're already on the hook for that. So why not spend $20,000, if it was, just making up a number, on them when they're 3, 4, or 5 years old, when it can actually change the trajectory of their lives? I mean, it's crazy to think that, you can throw money at a kid when, so much is already set in stone at age 18, and then it's actually going to make a difference. It really doesn't. I mean, the time to inflect our kids' trajectory is when they're young. That's when we can install or instill a love of reading.
Yeah. I
mean, education and success is just like, education is just like any other success endeavor. It's a numbers game. It's how many books the kids have read, how many math problems they have.
That's not just kids, that's humans. Like, the most successful people I know read the most books, period, end of story. How you were saying to me your daughter reads how many pages a day?
Well, they read easily 500 pages a day. But if we go on a trip, it could push 1,000 or 2,000, if they're in the car or in the airport or whatever. And my daughter, just if I could bring her up for a second, she was resistant. She didn't want to read. I have this rule in my car that the kids have to read in the car, period.
Huh.
There's no sitting, snacking. There's no TV, DVD watching. There's no distracting me because I'm doing things. I'm either thinking or I'm listening to my audiobooks, my podcasts. They have to be doing work too because, we could spend easily 2 hours a day in the car just running errands in New York. And instead of losing that time, I leveraged that time. And my daughter would not read in the car when she was, 5 years old or so. And it really was because she wasn't a very good reader at the time. But I turn around and I force her to read it. And everybody says, don't force your kids to read. They won't like to read. Well, I don't listen to anybody else. If that's not obvious yet. I forced her to read. And next thing you know, She is the biggest reader in a big reading family by far. I have to actually confiscate books from her in the morning because all she'll do is, if I let her, is read. She has 7 nightlights hidden throughout her bedroom. She acts like she's asleep and she reads all night. And I can tell in the morning when the bookmark in her book is moved, 150 pages, that the reason she can't get out of bed is because she was up reading all night.
Wow.
So,
and she's choosing her own books. You choose the books.
We choose a few here and there, but they mostly choose their own. Some people are very fanatical about, they don't want kids reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid and what they call the punk books.
Yeah.
My wife and I disagree a little bit on this. I don't care if they read the punk books. I just want them reading.
So you don't really care what they're reading. It's more for the sense of just get them into the habit of reading.
Okay, reading is cardio for the brain. Everything comes from reading. It lengthens attention span. It fires up imagination. It improves their vocabulary. Books have 9 times as many rare words as kids will ever hear in everyday conversation.
Yeah.
And the more I'm really big on vocabulary development. I'm very systematic about it. Not many people out there are, but I definitely am, because when you have words, when you have new ways that you can understand the world, that helps you in so many different ways. It gives you a cognitive edge and more weapons in your brain that you can, use in any situation in life.
Absolutely.
So reading is cardio for the brain. It's not the strength training. It's not the yoga. The yoga will be the arts, the music, and all that other stuff. The strength training is the hard math questions, the hard chess puzzles, solving the Rubik's Cube, learning how to computer program. That's the strength training. But reading is the cardio, and you can't play on a World Cup soccer team if you're out of shape. It's really foundational in my world, and non-negotiable too. In my family, you have to read. And the great thing about it is, once you get the kids to read, they won't stop. My kids have no interest in video games, no interest in television. They want to read. My daughter will, she will choose to read over talking to her friends. If she's in the middle of a good book, and so will I, and so will probably you. The other thing about books is they are naturally addictive.
Yeah.
They can't compete with screens. They can't compete with games that have billions of dollars of research, psychological research thrown into how to manipulate our brains, and they've gamified, the levels, and it's just, what they've done with these video games is, we'll put it this way: the video games makers, their goals are in stark opposition to yours as a parent. If you're an ambitious parent, they don't want your kid to go outside. They don't want your kid to develop their verbal skills. They don't want your kid to read books. So it's an important thing to remember that there's no humanitarian. Doesn't matter how much money Microsoft donates. They want your kid addicted to that device. Period.
100%. 100%. Amazing, Dan. Super insightful. Tell people how they can find out about the work that you do. I know your son has a podcast. If you want to share that, just where can they find out more?
Sure. So right now, my home base is homeschoolDad.com, and you can find more about me and what I do there. And from there, you can see my YouTube channel, my Facebook page. There are a few ways to kind of digest everything that I'm throwing at people, because it is a lot.
Yeah.
It is a whole paradigm shift. It can take years for what I'm saying to sink in with people. Usually the people who jump in with me, they're already there. I just kind of push them over the edge.
Yeah.
I actually have never met anybody else who takes homeschooling with the same eye towards pure acceleration that I do. And so I didn't really have anyone like me that I could, really go to, or that I could model. And so hopefully what I can do and have been doing is modeling this for people and helping them see, or at least dream a bigger vision for their own kids. Because I am not special. My kids are not special. It's all in the process. It's all in, the hours put in. It's all in the power of individualized instruction. It's really all about, getting the negatives out of our life and just filling it up with positives.
So brilliant. And your son is building a new website for you.
Yeah. So I am also branching out more into the non-homeschool world. because education, it has a spectrum. I have a whole new website called EinsteinBlueprint.com, and you won't see the word homeschooling pushed there so much. Homeschooling really is taking acceleration to the max. It doesn't have to be, but in my world, that's what it is. But there are several intermediate steps beforehand. Everything that I teach my kids or that I preach is about crushing reading and crushing math. And for the parents who want to send their kids to school, they'd be foolish not to, at least adopt some of my methodologies, because that kid's going to go to school. They're going to have to be a good reader to thrive, and they have to be good at math to thrive. And like I said, that stuff is very universal. Whether or not the homeschooling world scares the parents away, acceleration should be something that attracts at least their interest.
Absolutely. By the way, as just a final thing, when did your kids start reading? What age?
They weren't super early. My son might have been 4.5. My daughter might have been 5. I don't even know. There are babies online, and I have friends whose kids were reading at 2 and 3 years old. Yeah, I've seen it. Like I said, we didn't come out of the womb. They didn't come out of the womb, reading. My children are products of deliberate parenting, and anyone's kids and everyone's kids ultimately are as well.
Brilliant. So thank you so much. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of follow-up questions to this podcast here, which I will hopefully share with you, and maybe we can even do a follow-up to this. But amazing work. Thank you for just opening people's eyes and setting a new path. I think inevitably this will kind of become the norm, I hope. I think there's going to be a really, really big change in education as we know it. And it's good to have people like you kind of leading that charge. So thanks for sharing your wisdom with everybody.
All right. Thanks for having me, Len.
Awesome. So that's a wrap on that one. And like I said, absolutely incredible insight into the world of homeschooling, or I should say new world homeschooling. If you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free. Elon at SatoriPrime.com, ILAN at SatoriPrime.com. Would love to get your follow-up questions and share those with Dan. Once we get those, maybe we'll even have him back to just answer a few of your questions as well. Hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you thought, either in the comments or by sending me an email. As always, hope you're having an amazing day. Talk to you soon.
Did you run through doors till you hit the floor? Did you read my eyes and my aching thoughts? Did you walk through walls till you had to grow? Oh my God, you're smart and my soundless call.